fundamental message of Adam Smith, not a disagreement that in the good world, free trade would be the best of all possible courses, but they have tended to reflect special circumstances of the time. Perhaps the most famous such deviation was by the most noted, and some would say notorious, of the modern economists, John Maynard Keynes, the English economist who gave his name to the Keynesian Revolution. In 1931, in the course of the Depression, John Maynard Keynes, who had been a free trader all his life, came out in some articles in Britain in favor of departing from free trade and of introducing tariffs. He did so not because he thought that was in and of itself the best policy, but because he thought that the best policy was politically unfeasible. In his view, the right policy for Britain at that time was to go off the gold standard, end a fixed exchange rate, allow the pound sterling to be a free market currency whose price would be determined in the market, as it now is, of course, in a world of floating exchange rates today.
I think that Milton Friedman here is right about John Maynard Keynes's political feasibility versus what actually had to be done. I mean, Friedman later goes on to say that John Maynard Keynes proposed to raise tariffs, but that would have ended up hurting the British people, whereas if he had gone with what he thought was politically infeasible by putting Britain off the gold standard, let it be a currency that was based on market prices, that would have actually helped. It would have devalued the currency and made goods cheaper for people in Britain and boosted the economy. So right here, Milton Friedman's right.
But Keynes, an economist, made the political judgment that it was not politically feasible for Britain to go off the gold standard. Tariffs are an alternative to devaluation. After all, it comes roughly to the same thing if on the one hand, the price of the pound sterling was changed from the $4.80 some, which then was a price, to, let's say, $4. That would make British goods cheaper to foreigners. It would make foreign goods more expensive to Britons, and in that way it would redress the problem of the balance of payments they were facing. That's one way to do it, and the best one. But he thought that was politically unfeasible, and it comes to the same thing to introduce a tariff on imports and a subsidy to exports. That's an indirect and concealed form of devaluation. And so Keynes came out for that concealed form. His political judgment was, like that of many economists, flawed, and about 3 weeks after he came out for a tariff on these grounds, Britain went off the gold standard. I may say that this is not an isolated story. Time and again, economists, in my opinion, have erred when they have proposed second-best solutions in the area where they are experts, namely economics, because of predictions they make about political feasibility in an area where they are not experts. Now, it's often argued that the reason we have bad economic policy is because the experts disagree. That if only the experts would agree, if only all economists were of the same mind, then we would have an excellent and fine economic policy. The case of free trade and the tariff is a clear counterexample. Here is one case where economists have all agreed, or essentially so. As I say, you have the very minor deviations like Keynes, but very few others. And yet, except for the case of Great Britain, from the repeal of the Corn Laws in 1846 to the First World War, when for nearly a century Britain had complete free trade with no tariffs whatsoever on anything, except for that case, tariffs have been widespread. Why is it that you have the professional agreement on the one side and observed practice on the other, which departs so sharply from that agreement. The political reason is fairly straightforward. The political reason is that the interests that press for protection are concentrated. The people who are harmed by protection are spread and diffused. Indeed, the very language shows the political pressure. We call a tariff a protective measure. It does protect. It protects the consumer very well against one thing. It protects the consumer against low prices. J, which I'm sure you have all heard.
I think that point that Milton Friedman just made was probably the biggest in this whole video, that when you raise tariffs, it protects a small group of people that hold the same interests, like, steel producers, car manufacturers, anybody. I mean, today, China makes a lot of America's goods because they can do it more cheaply than us, and raising tariffs on these countries will only help the manufacturers in the United States, but it'll harm everyone else, that, consumers, everyday Joes that have to buy these products. So instead of paying the cheaper price that China can give to us, raising tariffs would only raise that and, hurt the consumers.